Before we begin, some players have reported that one of the raids I am going to talk about in this video, the Tower at Paradigm's Breach, has triggered their epilepsy. I will link to the Final Fantasy XIV wiki, which has more information, in the description below. Please be careful if that's a concern for you. Also, this video contains spoilers for the entire Drakengard franchise. Full spoilers for Drakengard 1, 2, 3, NieR, and NieR Automata ahead. Final Fantasy XIV is no stranger to crossover content. It's crossed over with other Final Fantasy games, it's crossed over with other series, both published by Square Enix and not, like Dragon Quest, Fall Guys, and Yokai Watch. You can fight a Rathalos in Final Fantasy XIV if you'd like to. Right now, as I'm working on this video, you can go buy bottles of Mountain Dew in order to redeem them for a mount called the Mountain Zoo. That's not technically a crossover, but it is very funny, so I had to mention it. My point is, Final Fantasy XIV is an advertising machine for Square Enix. They use it to advertise other games, and they use other games to advertise it. Perhaps the most high-profile example of this is YoRHa Dark Apocalypse, the Level 80 Alliance Raid series introduced in the Shadowbringers expansion, crossing over with NieR Automata, and, by extension, the larger Drakengard franchise. Most of the crossovers in Final Fantasy XIV have either been limited-time events or smaller-scale content. A single boss fight against a Rathalos is one thing, but an entire raid series being themed around another game is something else entirely. Previous raids, like the Return to Ivalice series or part of the Omega series, were themed around other Final Fantasy games, but YoRHa Dark Apocalypse is by far the biggest piece of content in the game themed around an entirely different franchise. This was pretty hype at the time. Between this raid being introduced and Gunbreaker being introduced as a new job, it got me to pick Final Fantasy XIV back up for the first time since Heavensward, and Shadowbringers and, in my opinion, Endwalker have both been good enough that I've stuck around ever since. This was 2019, just 2 years after NieR Automata became a surprise hit that resonated with a lot of people. So the hype around getting a legitimate new NieR story, directed by series creator Yoko Taro, was very real. I can only speak tangentially. I don't think we have actual numbers around this, but I definitely heard a lot of people say they were getting into Final Fantasy XIV back in 2019 because they wanted to see this raid, only to find that, yeah, Final Fantasy XIV rules. It's a great game. I personally think the hype around this raid announcement went a long way toward catapulting Final Fantasy XIV into becoming as popular in the past few years as we've seen. Then the raid itself came out, and, well, it's not exactly a slam dunk. I actually don't think it would be an exaggeration to say this is the most widely hated raid in Final Fantasy XIV's history, or at least the people who do hate it are the most vocal about it. A lot of people really hate this raid, calling it a waste of a slot, or saying it's just an advertisement for NieR Automata, or even saying that the storyline itself is completely nonsensical. I'm not fully on the hate train for this raid, as we'll get into, but I see why people felt burned by it. It not only expects you to have fully completed Automata in order to understand what's going on, it then, in the last raid, suddenly expects you to have fully completed Drakengard 1, NieR 1, and Drakengard 3 in order to understand what's even going on here. If you've only played Automata, then only one of the 4 bosses in the final raid in the series is going to look familiar to you, and the ending is going to come right out of nowhere. This has made talking about this raid uniquely challenging for me, because I knew I wanted to cover this raid at some point because it's so interesting, both for the ways it succeeds and the ways it fails, but I'd only played NieR Automata. I really like NieR Automata, but because of that, the last third of this raid only made the vaguest amount of sense to me. At the time, I kind of assumed I was just completely forgetting a lot of details from Automata, but during my initial research for this video, I realized this was because it required you to have played most of the games in a cult classic franchise that's been running for 20 years. If I wanted to really do this raid justice, I would have to go play through the entire franchise, including getting all of the secret endings, and that would be a lot of time and effort to put into a single video that's actually about another game entirely. So I went and played the Drakengard series. I 100%ed Drakengard 1, I 100%ed Drakengard 3, I played NieR 1 on my PS3, and the remake. I replayed NieR Automata, did every side quest, fully upgraded every weapon, all of it. I read dozens of fandom wiki articles to try to figure out what the Seeds of Destruction are, what the Watchers are, what happens in that Drakengard 3 sequel manga no one seems to like. I'm still working on getting all of the achievements for Replicant and Automata, and I have not finished Drakengard 2, but everyone says that game is barely canon and doesn't matter at all anyway, so surely not playing it is a choice that's not going to come back to bite me in the ass 2/3 of the way through this video. My point is, I went and played a lot of Drakengard. I return to you a changed man. Have you seen the frame rate on Drakengard 3? I paid like $70 for this game after DLC. Thank you to my patrons at patreon.com/Thuldum. This franchise has been like a sinkhole opening up beneath my feet, plunging me into the darkness of just a lot of edgelords. I joke, but I had a lot of fun with these games. I mean, they're bad, but they're also great. This series has been on my to-do list for like the past decade, so I'm really happy to have had an excuse to finally go play through it. While I'm not the world's premier Drakengard expert, and I wouldn't take that away from Klemps even if I could, I think I am now qualified to talk about this raid, explain what is even going on in it, and explain the ways in which I think it succeeds, and the ways in which it fails. I mean, I have the Drakengard 3 Platinum trophy now. Do you know what I had to do to get that trophy? I've seen things, man. I've seen things. So here's what we're doing. First, I'm going to go through the events of the raid series and try to explain what is actually going on in it without getting too bogged down in the deep lore implications. If you're a hardcore NieR fan who doesn't want to sink hundreds of hours into an MMO just to get a new NieR story, or if you're a Final Fantasy XIV player who wants to find out what's with the orb, then this video is for you. Then I want to actually analyze this story, explain those deep lore connections, and explain why I think this raid series is as disliked as it is. I don't think these raids are an unmitigated failure, but I have a lot of problems with them regarding the story. Make no mistake, there is some very cool stuff in this raid, I think both as a Final Fantasy XIV player and as a NieR fan, but I also think it drops the ball in a lot of ways. It's worth acknowledging both. But first, there's some groundwork you need to know if you haven't played NieR Automata before, or if you've only played Automata and no other Drakengard game. So let's start here. What is NieR Automata? If you have already played the Drakengard games, or have watched other breakdowns of the series' history, feel free to skip over this part. This video will be broken into chapters down below, but I think it's important that we're all on the same page about this series and its history in order to understand this raid. NieR Automata is the second game in the NieR sub-franchise, which is itself a spin-off of the Drakengard franchise. This makes it the 5th mainline game in the series, although all of these games are standalone enough, except perhaps Drakengard 2, to be played in any order. Drakengard, known as Dragon Dragoon in Japan, is a franchise that has been running since 2003. It started as a game in the Musou genre, which, if you don't know what that means, it means Dynasty Warriors clone. This is a style of game where you play as a single, ridiculously powerful warrior on foot in a battle against thousands of extremely weak enemies, while occasionally fighting bosses as powerful or stronger than you are. Narratively, the Drakengard franchise is defined by being incredibly bleak and edgy. Like Berserk, but if all of the characters were Guts. The Volume 1 version of Guts. The characters in these games are not your typical hopeful, honest, and decent protagonists. They are people who have critical, horrifying character flaws. And by character flaws, I mean, in the first game, we have a man fighting to rescue his sister, who he is in an incestuous relationship with, a and a woman who wants to eat children because she's lost her womb due to magic reasons, but still just really wants to have a child inside of her. Listen, I don't make the news, I just report it. The reason for this is because Drakengard is specifically meant to be a dark subversion of JRPGs and their tropes. These games, with the exception of Automata, in fact, anytime I make a generalization about these games, pretend I say with the exception of Automata after it, tend to start in incredibly stereotypical, cliched ways, and then take a hard left turn around the middle into just absolute lunacy. Each game has multiple endings, but there are generally no happy endings in Drakengard games. Bittersweet is the best you can hope for, and many of the endings are just downers. Usually, the harder you have to work for an ending, the worse it will end not only for the main characters of the game, but for the world at large. That's the opposite of how this usually works. Traditionally, the bad ending is the easiest one to get, and the good or true ending requires a lot of additional work. That is deliberate, as is the overall bleak and edgy nature of the stories of these games. The games in this franchise, especially the first Drakengard and the first NieR, are trying to provide commentary on the typical structure and narrative of JRPG games. Things like the power of friendship, by swerving them hard. Drakengard 1, in particular, has the main theme of killing always being wrong, even if you're morally in the right.
I understand your passion, but should you slaughter with such reckless abandon?
Do you laugh? Does the spilling of the blood of so many amuse you so?
Chaim! It's enough. He's dead. Full of bloodlust as always.
All of those omnicidal soldiers of the Empire are people too, even if they are murdering everyone in their path. So what's wrong of you to kill them, Chaim? To be honest, that's not a theme I have a lot of time for. I think the first Drakengard gets preachy in a pretty dumb way. So I'm not saying the series is always providing good commentary. It's not. And I'm not saying it's always tasteful. It's not. I'm just saying that it is trying to say something. It is trying to comment on the way, for example, Cloud Strife cuts down hundreds and hundreds of soldiers over the course of Final Fantasy VII, and we still consider him the hero. It was 2003, so the observation that ludonarrative dissonance exists was still novel at the time. Drakengard also handles its multiple endings in a pretty unique way. Rarely are the multiple endings based on choices made throughout the game, rather alternate paths will unlock for how the story might have gone after you've achieved an ending. Once you've gotten ending A, then you can replay part of the game with some new content to get ending B, then ending C, and so on. It's important to note, all of these endings, all of these realities are canon. Each sequel in the series is not a sequel to the game as a whole, but a sequel to a specific ending. For example, Drakengard 2 is a sequel to the events of ending A of the first game. Or, well, officially it's technically a sequel to a separate timeline that's not featured in the original game, which mirrors every major event of Branch A just to make things more confusing. While NieR is a sequel to ending E of the original game. After Drakengard 2 released in 2005, the series laid dormant for a while until 2010 brought us NieR. NieR is a radical departure from the previous games in the series in two ways. First, it's not a Musou game, it's an action-adventure RPG. Think Ocarina of Time, but with RPG mechanics. NieR is also, though, a very weird game mechanically. It changes genres frequently. While the game's default state is that of Ocarina of Time-esque gameplay, the game frequently shifts to a 2D platformer perspective, and an entire level might suddenly change to be an isometric ARPG, or even a text adventure. As mentioned before, NieR is also based on ending E of the original Drakengard, which is specifically an interesting choice because ending E was never designed with a sequel in mind. At the time, it was specifically designed as a joke, a secret ending unlocked by completely 100%ing the game, which saw the deuteragonists of the game, the warrior Kaim and his dragon partner Angelus, teleported alongside the queen beast kaiju they fight at the climax of Route D to modern-day Tokyo, where they fight and defeat it in a rhythm game segment that's completely unlike anything else in the game, before being immediately shot down and killed by fighter jets.
It is done.
This is Bravo 1. Unidentified target has been neutralized. Over and out.
Drakengard is weird. I cannot stress that enough. NieR took this joke ending and followed it up in a fascinating way. We open on a world on the brink of apocalypse, as whatever exotic material the Queen Beast was made out of has dissolved and spread out over the world, blanketing it in this white ash that has caused a sort of metaphysical illness that's killing off the human race. Then we flash forward 1,000 years to find a world that's regressed to medieval states and is on the brink of total collapse. This is not a NieR retrospective, so without going into the whole plot and gestalts and replicants and white chlorination syndrome and androids and shades, here's what you actually need to know. By the end of NieR, because of the actions of the protagonist, the human race is doomed. They're going to die. They are going to go fully extinct, and there's nothing to be done about it. All they're going to leave behind is their stuff, their cities, and their accomplishments, including androids who were specifically designed and programmed to protect humanity. So, what do those androids do now that humanity is dead? What does a machine do when it's been programmed for a specific purpose, and when it's advanced enough to feel emotions like love and hate and anger and sadness, but that purpose it feels down in its very bones is irrelevant? That is the setting of NieR Automata. That is what NieR Automata is about. Drakengard 3 ended up being a prequel to all of this, set well before Drakengard 1, but I'm going to hold off on talking about Drakengard 3 until later in this video because I think we're going to have to talk about some things before we talk about Zero and her whole deal. NieR Automata went in the other direction, the furthest forward we'd been on the timeline by far. It's set in the year 11,945, over 8,000 years after the original NieR, and so for 8,000 years, these robots have just been puttering about, looking for meaning. At some point during those 8,000 years, the Earth was invaded by aliens, and those aliens built robots called the Machine Lifeforms to fight in a proxy war against the androids. Now, that's the purpose they've found, both the androids and the Machine Lifeforms, to endlessly fight each other forever. Our protagonists are two androids that are a part of the Special Task Force unit YoRHa, which doesn't actually stand for anything, it's just stylized as an acronym because it sounds cool. YoRHa number 2 Type B, or 2B for short, and YoRHa number 9 Type S, or 9S for short. The S in 9S stands for Scanner, as he's a model focused on recon and hacking, while the B in 2B stands for her just fantastic booty. Don't worry about it. And that is the background on the franchise so far, which I feel you really need to know going into the story of YoRHa Dark Apocalypse, before it's going to make a lick of sense. Without further ado, let's talk about the story of YoRHa Dark Apocalypse. If you're a NieR Automata fan who's watching this video because you have no interest in Final Fantasy XIV, then really all you need to know before going into this story is that it's not set in the prime reality that most of the game is. It's set in a parallel universe of sorts called a reflection, specifically the first reflection, which is similar to but distinct from the prime timeline the game takes place in, called the Source. The reason for this is because the entire Shadowbringers expansion is set in the first, which is a sort of post-apocalyptic parallel reality where 90% of the planet was completely obliterated about 100 years prior to the events of the game. That's a huge simplification. I already have a video about the story of Shadowbringers if you're interested in more details. My Final Fantasy XIV videos are all designed to be easy to understand, whether you've played the game before or not, but I'm going to talk about parallel realities and timelines later on, so really just keep in mind, when I say the first, if you're not a Final Fantasy XIV player, just know that I mean the world this story is set in. The story begins on the island of Calusia, specifically in the isolated mountain region of Scree, which is primarily populated by two rival clans of dwarves, the village of Tomra, inhabited by the Thal clan, and the village of Comra, inhabited by the Gog clan. On a trip to Tomra, whose inhabitants you befriended during the events of Shadowbringers, you hear a rumor that the Gogs over in Comra have made some sort of huge discovery. Because of their rivalry, the Thal are in a frenzy to find out what this huge discovery is, and so you get sent to Comra to investigate. When you reach Comra, you learn that the Gogs have found ruins filled with strange, unidentified machinery that the dwarves are excavating. You are, however, denied entry to the ruins. The dig site chief also asks you to deliver a message to a pair of twins in the village named Konog and Anog. Konog, the male twin, wears all black, while Anog, the female twin, wears all white. Yes, the female twin also has a beard, except she actually doesn't. Neither of them do. In 14, for reasons that aren't important enough to explain in this video, dwarves don't actually have beards, they just wear scarves that are fashioned to look like beards as a part of their culture. I only bring this up because we're going to see the twins without their beards later on, so just know now that's why. The twins are trying to get into the dig site, and so the chief sends you to tell them they're still banned before they get any clever ideas. This, right here, is I think one of the reasons this story is so poorly received. You see, you might expect 2B or 9S, the guest characters from NieR Automata, to be the main characters of this story. They are not. If not either of them, then you might expect the Warrior of Darkness, the player character, to be the main character of this story. Nope, not them either. The main characters of this story are Konog and Anog, the mischievous young dwarven twins from Comra. Everyone else, 2B, 9S, the Warrior of Light, they're all just supporting characters in Konog and Anog's story. That's a weird choice. This raid undeniably brought a lot of people to the game. There are a lot of people who got pulled into Final Fantasy XIV because they liked NieR Automata and wanted to see how 2B and 9S would be used in this story. They are, of course, in this story, but they are also not the characters who get any kind of narrative or emotional arc. The twins try to rope you into their plans to get into the dig site, but the three of you all end up rejected. The site is off limits, and for a time, that is that. In the next patch, you return to Comra to learn that someone has been breaking into the dig site and stealing items from it, which may be connected to a string of thefts in the town itself. The dig site chief thinks people won't connect an outsider walking around town investigating as quickly as they will if he does so himself, so he asks you to look into the robberies. You soon identify that the person behind the robberies is the dig site watchman, a sketchy individual in charge of making sure only authorized people gain access to the dig site, who has been involved with a gang of thieves among the Gogs. You defeat the thieves, the watchman does say the phrase, "We would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for you meddling kids." That's not a joke I'm making, that's actually in the game's dialogue, and you get the key off of the watchman yourself. You expose the watchman's crimes to the dig site chief, but you keep the dig site key for yourself, just in case. This leads to the first real quest of the raid, called On the Threshold. The dig site chief notices that he hasn't seen Konog and Anog in quite some time, which is never a good thing, so he asks you to track them down. You find them at the entrance to the dig site, which is now, of course, missing its watchman, and you just so happen to have the key to the gate. Curiosity gets the better of the three of you, and so you decide to enter the excavation tunnels and rob the dig site blind yourselves, now that you've stopped the watchman from doing so. So you enter the tunnels, and upon finding another locked door, decide to just blow it up with some quality dwarven engineering. Behind this locked door, you find 3 of the machine lifeforms attacking a woman who looks exactly like 2B, except with an inverted color scheme: white clothes and black hair. After defeating the machines with more quality dwarven engineering, the dig site chief catches the 3 of you, and together you all examine the mysterious woman who is being attacked. This is not 2B, but rather 2P, who introduces herself and quickly says that the machine lifeforms deeper in the ruins must be stopped. 2P is herself actually a deep-cut piece of fan service, and a nod to the fandom surrounding Automata. When 2B was featured as a guest fighter in Soul Calibur 6, she featured this inverted color scheme as an alternate costume. The costume gained its own following, and fans started referring to it as 2P, as in second player. Yosuke Saito, producer on the NieR games, even directly referenced this during a teaser for the YoRHa raid series. After 2P leads you to another gate that has been sealed by the machine lifeforms, Konog and Anog solve the problem by, you'll never guess, blowing it up, unsealing the door to the first of the 3 raids in this series, the Copied Factory. The Copied Factory is recognizable as a replica of the Abandoned Factory from Automata, the very first level of the game, but now transported to a valley in Calusia. So, why is it here? One of the biggest complaints I see about this raid series that I don't agree with is that it doesn't make any sense that this massive ruined facility has been here all along, and no one found it until now. It's pretty clear that it's not the same factory, but a copy of it from the title of the raid. But why have the machine lifeforms rebuilt the factory here in the first? For that matter, why have these characters from the NieR universe made their way to the first? Well, there is an explanation, but this raid series doesn't give that explanation until very late in the storyline. So for now, let's note that as a deliberate mystery and move along. Alliance raids in Final Fantasy XIV are all formatted the same: 3 groups of 8 players for 24 players total, with 4 bosses per raid and trash or mini-boss encounters in between them. The first boss of the Copied Factory is a unique machine lifeform called the Serial Jointed Command Model. This is about as generic as a boss fight against a machine lifeform boss could be, which I think fits perfectly for the very first encounter. After this warm-up, we continue deeper into the factory, fighting our way through machine lifeforms on our way. Eventually, we reach the second boss, Hobbs. I think this one is a really fun idea for NieR fans. You're going through the machine lifeform's product testing phase. Hobbs is a large, GLaDOS-esque machine lifeform hanging from the ceiling of a huge room who puts newly manufactured machine lifeforms through their paces, testing for durability, speed, intelligence, and the like. This is an original character for the NieR raid, but this concept feels like it would have been right at home in the original game. This boss also follows the same naming convention the machine lifeforms in the original game did, being named after a philosopher, in this case Thomas Hobbes. I also like this boss mechanically, as each of the 3 8-man parties forming the raid group are placed onto separate platforms which have to deal with slightly different mechanics during the fight, which is a cool idea. After defeating Hobbs, you continue into the depths of the factory. You find a YoRHa flight unit, one of the aerial battle mechs used by androids like 2B and 9S, and 2P uses it to help fight a Goliath tank, a mini-boss enemy from Automata. Once the Goliath tank is down, the flight unit ends up being mysteriously hacked by someone deeper in the factory, and you fight it as another mini-boss. After these mini-bosses, you've made it through the factory and re-emerge on the other side, only to find that the climate has changed. While it initially looks like it's snowing, Konog and Anog remark that it actually seems to be some kind of mineral dust. This is very ominous for players of NieR. The third boss of the Copied Factory is our first actual returning boss from the NieR series, Engels. Engels is the first boss of Automata, and among the most recognizable in the game. A giant machine lifeform that looks like a mix of a large crane and an oil rig. After Engels is defeated, we immediately head into the final boss of the first raid, and discover who earlier hacked the flight unit, and who has been in control of the machine lifeforms. YoRHa number 9 Type S, piloting a machine lifeform referred to as the Walking Fortress. Upon seeing you with 2P, 9S attacks, serving as the final boss of this raid in a flight unit that he's able to dock into a large machine lifeform to control it directly. If you'll allow me a tangent for a moment, another interesting thing about this fight is that back in 5.1, right when this raid was first released, something strange could happen here. Extremely rarely, another NPC would spawn in this room, a friendly NPC called Dying Red Dragon, which only one person in the 24-man raid was able to see. The NPC itself was from a level 80 Dark Knight quest, but a lot of people latched onto this because of the significance of not only dragons, but specifically a dying red dragon in the world of NieR. Angelus is, of course, a red dragon, Kaim's pact partner, and one of the deuteragonists of Drakengard 1, who ends up getting shot down in the E ending of Drakengard 1 that leads to the NieR series. Yoko Taro, the creator of the Drakengard series and the director of all of the games in the series except for Drakengard 2, has a reputation for being a mischievous trickster spirit that got into game design. A lot of people took this strange occurrence as some sort of hint for where the raid was going. Surely it can't be a coincidence that this dying red dragon is spawning in the same area where we see the decaying ash of the queen beast falling. Was it possible that Angelus was not killed by those fighter jets at the end of Drakengard 1 after all? Is there some sort of time travel going on? Why can only some players see her and not others? Were we going to interact with her in later parts of the raid? Was there some greater meaning to this bizarre Easter egg? Nope, it was later confirmed to be a bug. During the creation of the raid, they used the Dying Red Dragon as an arbitrary dummy NPC to test placements of elements in the encounter, specifically where an entirely different model would spawn after the boss was defeated. By mistake, a flag was left enabled that, under extremely specific circumstances, would allow players to see this invisible model when they reached this part of the raid, and it just coincidentally happened to be a dummy model that players could interpret as lore significant to the larger Drakengard series. I bring this up because it's one of my all-time favorite game design anecdotes, up there with the Heineken label accidentally left in Dark Souls 2. It's very easy to assume when playing a game that everything is deliberate, everything is put there with meaning by the game developers, but games are still made by people, sometimes there are mistakes, and sometimes there are coincidences. I find this bug and the reaction to it very charming and human, both on the side of the developers and the players who read meaning into it. Fighting 9S here raises a lot of questions. Why is he working with the machine lifeforms and against 2P? When is this raid set in relation to NieR Automata? What is 2P's purpose here now that we realize 9S has been her actual enemy the whole time? How did 9S and all of the other NieR characters travel to the first? Some of these questions will even be answered over the course of the raid series. After you've taken 9S's Walking Fortress down, he very graciously gives you a few minutes to distribute loot among yourselves. Once you progress, he gets out of the Walking Fortress and has a one-on-one fight with 2P. 2P is able to get the upper hand on 9S, landing a solid blow that knocks his blindfold clear off, which is symbolism when it happens in NieR Automata, but here it just means he took heavy damage as he's knocked off the edge of the platform. During the fight, however, 2P is critically damaged. Konog, Anog, and the player take 2P back to the cave at the entrance to the copied factory and ask her what's going on and who 9S was. She explains that he's not a human at all, but an android, a machine designed to imitate human life, just like she is. Everyone is shocked to hear that 2P is a machine, as no technology resembling her exists in this universe, even in the most technologically advanced and sci-fi civilizations we've seen. Before we can learn much more, 2P shuts down, leaving us with more questions than answers. After this, you get a chance to explore the copied factory freely with Konog and Anog. Anog wants to dive into the factory and start pulling apart and studying the tech there, eventually hoping to repair 2P to continue working with her, while Konog wants to play things a little more cautiously, since the technology in the factory is clearly dangerous. You're also given a portable archive that lets you pick up and decipher lore notes throughout the raid series. At this point, the game gives you a choice who you want to support: Anog's reckless behavior or Konog's caution. So this decision is more important than it might initially seem, kind of, maybe. The going theory is that because multiple endings are so important to the Drakengard series, this raid series was intended to have multiple endings too, and that this decision was the trigger for it. As far as I know, this has never been confirmed, but it's believed that this decision was supposed to be the trigger for which ending was achieved, but it wouldn't be based on any specific player's choice here. Rather, it would be based on the server's overall choice. The reason people believe this is because if we jump all the way ahead to patch 5.55, after you get the ending card for the story, it plays back percentages for who each server chose to support. So then, why theoretically? Well, every server in every region picked Anog. All of them. Every single one. And they were all pretty much around a 65-35% split. Given how some things go, especially some things about Anog we're going to learn down the line, this has led to one theory that we've only seen the bad ending to this story. And unless someone spills the beans, or the Final Fantasy XIV team go back to add another ending to the New Game Plus version of this raid, we may never see what the other option was. This is also supported by the fact that when you reach the end, what we see is labeled as Ending E, which is typically the true ending of these games, but we never got endings A through D of this story. A confusing choice. Of course, this has also led to a conspiracy theory that these stats are completely faked, especially since the stats are so close to each other across the board, and that the whole thing is an elaborate troll. On the other hand, this isn't completely out of the question. For the Valentine's Day 2020 event, or Valention's Day as it's called in FF14, the devs had a similar idea, preparing 3 different ways the quest's story could play out, associated with a red, blue, and yellow color scheme. And once again, literally every server picked the exact same option. I do think it would be weird if this is how the alternate endings were determined. After all, while Drakengard is known for its alternate endings, it's also known for doing them in ways much weirder than just picking option A or option B. Having it be determined by the entire server's population is a distinct wrinkle, so maybe that's a unique idea, but I don't know. Also, having multiple branching storylines would be out of the norm for Final Fantasy XIV, and if you're going to do something like that, then a raid with a guest director is certainly the place where it could happen, but I wonder if the game is even capable of tracking branching storylines like that under the hood. An alternate ending to a single event quest is one thing, but an entire branching storyline? I can't think of any place where that's happened in this game. I don't know. If you held my feet to the fire, I'd say I don't think there was ever another ending actually planned, and I think the Konog and Anog statistics were probably just coincidentally roughly the same, but I'm not 100% confident that we aren't just missing another ending that might make this whole thing at least a bit more narratively satisfying. The Konog and Anog quests themselves are also virtually identical to each other. It wouldn't actually make sense for this quest to determine how the storyline branches, since basically nothing changes between the two versions. You can still go back and do both quests to see how they play out, and all that really changes is who is saying the dialogue in them. There's nothing more or less cautious about either approach. Both quests go the exact same way. You travel through the copied factory with your chosen dwarf companion, you come across a room full of dead 2B bodies, you gather parts to repair a pod, and then you come across 9S after he fell during the fight. And Anog decides to take him with her in order to study him, and just generally keep another android in her back pocket just in case. You also find a strange device with 9S, which you assume is what 2P was after in her assault on the factory, but without her around to explain what it is, there's nothing to do but take it with you and keep it secure. With that, we move forward to patch 5.2. While this didn't add the second part of the raid, it did add some more quests in the series. Some months have passed, and Connaught and Annog are still studying and attempting to repair 2P and the other machines discovered in the ruins. You're sent by the dig site chief, who at this point I really wish they'd given a name because of how much you interact with him in this storyline, to go check up on the twins. It turns out the pod has been able to confirm that the strange device found in the factory is called the Key, and it's the remote control to some kind of weapon, and was indeed what 2P was trying to get from 9S. Annog wants to use the key to find out what sort of weapon it controls, while Connaught reasonably says that maybe you shouldn't go pushing random buttons on the controller to a super weapon. At this point, if there are branching paths, then we're already on Annog's path, so eventually Connaught concedes that Annog is right, and you should start messing with the key, so you can harness the weapon against the androids should they attack. I think that's pretty dumb, and is obviously going to backfire on Annog, but here we are. The key is completely out of power, so the twins send you on a fetch quest to go get some material that can recharge it. That's the 5.2 quests down. They're really just here to remind you of what's going on during the months-long intermission the quest chain had at the time. When the 5.3 quests begin, the village of YoRHa is holding a carnival, and you've come to celebrate with them. There's food, drink, and everyone is having a wonderful time, except that is for Connaught and Annog. When you come across them, they excitedly tell you that they've managed to reactivate the key, and are ready to use it to attempt to take control of whatever weapon it is tied to. Unfortunately, Connaught and Annog can't make heads or tails out of what the controls on the key actually say, and want to revive 2P so she's able to help them. The pod the dwarves repaired is able to repair 2P in turn, if provided with some replacements for her damaged parts, and so the dwarves ask you to go with them to the corpse room where you found all of the copies of 2B in order to pull some replacement parts out of the bodies. Pretty grisly, actually, when you think about it. With these parts, the pod is able to repair 2P, and she awakens. Immediately, they hand the key over to her, and she starts to use it. You seem smart, so I'm sure you can figure out where handing the remote control to a super weapon over to a strange android we barely know, who is desperately searching for it, is going to go. As soon as 2P activates the remote, the Earth begins shaking as some kind of bombardment begins to rock YoRHa. As all of you leave the tunnels, you see the madness as YoRHa flight units have begun blowing the town up, and have left the nearby mountains as smoking ruins. An entire squad of black-clad YoRHa androids emerge from the smoke as 2P goes to face them. As Annog tells 2P not to try fighting all of them on her own, she turns around and reveals that she's not going to, because she's the one who brought them all here. All of their clothes flicker from black to white, matching 2P's, and she turns to face us. Yes, to no one's surprise, 2P was the evil android all along. Even if you aren't familiar with Automata, this is telegraphed pretty heavily in the copied factory. Not only is the player fighting 9S, the protagonist of Automata, a Tell, but many of the machine life forms you fight there can be heard screaming and begging for mercy as you and 2P strike them down. As 2P goes to kill Annog, she's rescued at the last moment by our actual ally, 2B, rather than the imitation we've been interacting with so far. This is the 2B from Automata, or at least some timeline's variant of her, who is here working with 9S to try to stop 2P and the white-clad androids from destroying this entire reality, the first and everyone in it. By handing her the remote, Annog has set in motion the plans of these white YoRHa units, as it appears the key was some sort of targeting system, one which the androids used to crash their entire space station, a copy of the bunker from Automata, into the side of Calusia, leveling an entire mountain and leaving a desert crater there instead. I don't want to glaze over this because this really bothers me. That key that 2P was looking for, which allowed the P units to crash the bunker into Calusia, why did they need that? I guess maybe the other P units didn't come from the station, and they'd all been hiding for months until 2P was recovered, but I'm not trying to CinemaSins this storyline. At the end of the day, it's a MacGuffin the plot needed to move forward, but I think it's an extremely weak MacGuffin. If the other P units were aboard the bunker, then why weren't they able to leave it? Why weren't they able to target anything on the ground, or make a new targeting remote? And if they weren't aboard the bunker, where were they during the first raid? Why weren't they trying to recover or repair 2P themselves before now? It's very thin. There's no time for introductions or explanations as the three of you join 2B in an assault against the white-clad YoRHa units, in the second raid of the series, the Puppets Bunker. The Puppets Bunker is visually evocative of the desert region from NieR Automata, although narratively there's no connection to it. It basically looks like the bunker the space station YoRHa uses as its main base of operations from Automata if it crashed into the desert region from that game. 2B takes a flight unit and goes ahead of you to try to stop 2P, leaving you to make your way through the bunker on foot and take out the other P units along the way. With this raid, we've moved away from fighting machine life forms and moved to fighting the white YoRHa androids, although there are still the bodies of dead machine life forms strewn about the raid's environment. The name the Puppets Bunker also gives us an idea of what the P in 2P and all of the other white androids' designations stands for. Puppet. These YoRHa units are being controlled by someone or something else. You start on some of the outer rubble, where you immediately fight the first boss, 813P operated Aegis unit. This is a large mech unit shaped sort of like an upside-down flower, who spins around and hits you with lasers, as well as white ring attacks we'll discuss later on. Once the Aegis unit is down, we progress into the actual bunker itself, now underground in the hangar area. Here we fight our second boss, a set of 3 YoRHa flight units fought all at once, superior flight units Alpha, Beta, and Chi. Once your raid has wiped at least once because someone pointed stack markers at another group, you're ready to progress into the bunker proper. The next bit has you using the iconic ring of the bunker as a slide until you reach the YoRHa command room for your third boss fight. The third boss, 905P operated heavy artillery unit, is a walking spider tank. This fight involves the YoRHa bunker's systems being used against you, hitting you with laser defenses and heavy artillery from the tank, and is certainly the hardest boss in the raid, which gives a good impression that the YoRHa units really are getting desperate to stop you. During this fight, you can see Operator 210 from Automata, 9S's handler, appears on the screen to initiate attacks. More on that later. After this fight, you progress through the most hated hallway in the entire raid series, dodging a series of lasers and orb projectiles as you make your way deeper and deeper into whatever lies below the bunker. When you reach the end of this long corridor, you emerge in a familiar room from Automata, the inner chamber of one of the alien ships, where you learn that the machine life forms rose up against their creators and killed them long before the game even began. This is the stage for our final boss of the Puppets Bunker. As we enter the room, we see that 2B has just managed to land a killing blow on 2P, but upon doing so, 2P activates some sort of emergency protocol in the case of her death. Arms start to erupt out of her corpse before entire bodies emerge from it. These blank, mannequin-esque bodies that emerge from 2P are recognizable as android corpses. We see throughout Automata that this is what all androids look like under their skin. Hundreds of these bodies crawl out of 2P's corpse and form into a pile, which amalgamates into our next fight, a giant orb called the Compound. You face off against the compound, and after dealing enough damage to it, it reforms into Compound 2P, a giant 2P made up out of these puppet corpses. Eventually, your raid defeats Compound 2P, and it dissipates. You return to the entrance of the raid with Konog, Anog, and 2B. Anog looks out over the destruction and blames herself for what happened. Which, I mean, yeah. 2B is nicer than I am, though, and tells Anog not to blame herself for what happened, saying that if she'd defeated 2P sooner, she would have been able to stop all of this. Konog asks 2B who she is, who 2P is, and if she's really our ally. 2B tells you that she doesn't understand what's going on either. All she knows is that she was in her home world fighting machines, and the next thing she can remember, she was here in the first. She can't contact command, and she realizes she's in a wholly unfamiliar world. She found Comra and the attacking P units by, in her own words, following the explosions. 2B is able to tell you that she does not recognize 2P as an authentic YoRHa android. Rather, she believes her and the other P units to be replicas of YoRHa androids built by the machine lifeforms to fight against YoRHa. Konog tells 2B that they also recovered another android, 9S, and takes her to go see him. 2B requests aid in repairing him in the same way we repaired 2P earlier, and Konog is more than happy to help, while Anog is, she's a little bit blue screen of deathing. Konog suggests that he and Anog go enjoy the carnival in order to lighten her spirits, which... Konog, come on. The carnival was just razed to the ground. You were there. Read the room. On your way out, you find that the surviving dwarves of Comra have formed an angry mob, coming to blame Konog and Anog, and to some extent the player, for all of the death and destruction that's just occurred. This angry mob is led by the village leader, Glog, who says that he's here to get to the bottom of what's going on. He asks you to talk to the various dwarves in the group and hear what each of them has to say, whether Konog or Anog is to blame for everything that happened. You listen to everyone. Some of them blame Konog for being too slow to act, some of them blame Anog for being reckless, and some of them blame you for enabling them. Glog asks you to make the decision of who is to blame, but regardless of who you blame, or if you try to say it's complicated, just as Anog is about to step forward and claim responsibility, 2B steps into the situation. She tells the angry dwarves that she was behind it all, and draws her sword in order to scare the group away, saving the two siblings from punishment. You go with 2B and Konog back to the room where 9S is being kept, and she says that she's going to take 9S away from the village of angry dwarves, presumably to repair him herself. Obviously, we haven't seen the last of either of them, but they'll be away for some time as we close out the 5.3 portion of this storyline. When you return to the main cavern, Anog is gone. Konog is worried about her and sends you to go search for her outside of Comra, but she's nowhere to be found. You return to Konog and find him standing in the ruined rubble of Comra post-attack. Not only is he worried about his sister, but the other villagers are now so frightened of him that they won't even speak to him, leaving him totally alone. This is how the 5.3 chapter of this storyline ends, with 2B and 9S temporarily out of the picture, presumably a larger machine lifeform conspiracy still brewing, Anog missing in action, Comra destroyed, and the villagers frightened and out for blood, looking for someone to blame. 5.4 added another quest as an interlude between raids, like 5.3 did. The 5.4 quest is called To Make Amends. Worried about how Konog is doing on his own, you return to Comra to check up on him, only to find him depressed and blaming himself for everything. You convince Konog that dwelling on what's happened isn't going to help anyone, and so you suggest that he tries to find a way to do good now and move forward from this tragedy he and his sister have inadvertently caused. Before anything else can be said, Konog is confronted by an angry dwarf who blames him and his sister for the attack. The dwarf's wife is at death's door after being hurt in the attack, and he wants to make sure Konog knows it's his fault. Connaught wants to make amends to the people he accidentally hurt, and so you ask around town and find out that a gift of mead might be a comfort to the distraught and angry husband. The town's liquor supply was destroyed in the attack, so the two of you set off to a human village on the island, the village of Stilltide, to purchase some. Much of this quest just amounts to traveling with Connaught to buy the mead, and so for time, I'll skip forward a bit and tell you that, predictably, the gift of mead doesn't go over well. No gift is going to make up for this man's dying wife lying in agony. He doesn't want Connaught to make amends. He's not going to accept an apology, he just wants Connaught to hurt for what he's done. Distraught, Connaught runs off on his own. Soon, the dig site chief tells you he saw Connaught running off towards the puppet's bunker, and asks that you go after him to make sure he's safe. You eventually find Connaught deep in the bunker, in the room where you fought the compound during the raid. Connaught is doing something that I can only describe as communing with an orb, as there's a giant, smooth, white orb in the room now that has Connaught in a type of trance. Love it. Love to commune with an orb. I'm into it. For right now, for the story of this raid itself, all you need to know is that this orb is an existing thing from the Drakengard franchise. It's called a Seed of Resurrection or a Seed of Destruction, based on who you're asking, and it is very bad news, responsible for ushering in the apocalypse in several of the endings of Drakengard 1. It is also, in Drakengard 1, a precursor to the Watchers being released from the pocket dimension in which they've been sealed. The Watchers are giant flying babies that want to destroy the world. Once again, I have to stress that Drakengard is very weird. Upon approaching Connaught, you have a vision, which if you're coming to this without having played 14, is a thing that sometimes just happens to our character, don't worry about it, and see the past. What seems to be years before this storyline even began, Connaught and Annog were exploring a cave when there was a sudden earthquake. This caused a cave-in that caught Annog as she pushed her brother to safety. Crushed under the rubble, Annog was killed. Then we see a grief-stricken Connaught deeper in the caves, in denial that he just saw his sister's death. Calling out for her, he instead finds this mysterious orb, the same one we found him communing with in the present. The orb lights up and is covered with angelic script, and from it emerges Annog, without her gloves or helmet, and speaking in a strange language. This facsimile of Annog uses some sort of powers connected with the orb to scan Connaught, and, with an uncanny smile, says Connaught's name. We flash back to the present and tell Connaught you've seen when Annog emerged from the orb, and tell him whatever that thing is, it can't have been her. Connaught is still in denial, insisting that his sister is fine, is normal. It's Annog. It's her. You convince him to come back home with you, and in a wide shot we see 2B was watching this conversation unfold. With Connaught alone, and now having some sort of mental breakdown, you return to the dig site chief. You fill him in on what you saw, and with that, the 5.4 quest ends. Alright, are you ready to move into patch 5.5, the third and final raid of the series, to see how all of this ends? Let's go. You return to Comra after some more time has passed, and the dig site chief sends you to check on Connaught once more, who has had the same malaise ever since you last spoke to him. You find Connaught has collapsed in the tunnels, running a high fever. You take him to the same bed where 9S was previously being kept, and strip some of the layers off of him. He wakes up for a time, but is very clearly not lucid, saying he needs to go find Annog. You tell the dig site chief of the state you found Connaught in, but upon returning, Connaught is nowhere to be found. We're then treated to a cutscene showing 2B with the unconscious 9S as someone approaches her, but we cut away before seeing who it was. You ask the villagers of Comra if they've seen Connaught, but have no luck. The dig site chief, however, tells you he heard Connaught was spotted heading towards the puppet's bunker, and so the two of you head off towards it. You, of course, find Connaught unconscious back at the orb, but as you approach it, it activates, and starts spitting out dozens of 2P units. You get ready to fight, but as you do, 2B, 9S, and Anog all run into the room, shouting at you to destroy the orb while you still can. Despite being a creation of the Seed of Destruction, it seems that Anog's years spent with her brother have broken its spell and made her into her own person, and your ally. Why, you ask? Unfortunately, it's too late. All of the 2P units begin emitting a shriek and disappear. The orb begins to glow, and we actually get to see it create a third and final replica of a location from NieR Automata, a replica of the tower which serves as the final level of that game. This is our third raid, the Tower at Paradigm's Breach. Anog tells you that there's no time to explain, that you all need to infiltrate the tower and stop the seed from destroying the entire world. Choosing to trust Anog once more, the 4 of you begin climbing the tower along with 23 of the player's closest friends. The Tower at Paradigm's Breach is where the hacking element from NieR Automata is introduced, as you're alternating between scaling the tower and infiltrating the machine network, as 9S and 2B create entrances to cyberspace. The bosses of Paradigm's Breach are a departure from the rest of the raid series, as only one of the 4 are from Automata. The first 2 bosses are both from the original NieR, and the final boss is... well, you'll see. It's also worth mentioning that this raid is really hard compared to the other Alliance raids. Alliance raids in Final Fantasy XIV are all designed to be played with pickup groups, so usually aren't too demanding, but I still frequently see wipes on the last 3 of the 4 bosses in this raid. It is, in my opinion, by far the hardest Alliance raid in the game. As soon as you enter, you immediately head into cyberspace and fight the first boss, the Knave of Hearts. This is one of the more iconic bosses from NieR. They're called the Jack of Hearts, who attacks the main character's village at the midpoint of the game, just before the time skip. The name being changed from Jack of Hearts to Knave of Hearts is still a reference to the playing card, as it was originally referred to as the Knave of Hearts, but the terminology changed sometime in the 17th century. This boss is what's referred to as a shade in the original NieR. Essentially, yes, this is a simplification, it's a human soul that has been disassociated from its body, and after 1,000 years has been warped into this form. Why is it here in the raid? Well, for this and the second boss both, I'm assuming that since they're fought inside of the network, these are just digital replicas created by the machine lifeforms based on historical records, or records from the Seed of Destruction somehow. Handwave, hashtag #JustOrbathings. After this, we fight Hansel and Gretel, who are the first major bosses after the tutorial of NieR. These are 2 animated suits of armor who are defending Grimoire Weiss, and who you defeat to rescue your daughter, or sister depending on the version, YoRHa. Again, I'm assuming these are just some kind of data reconstruction. After this, we fight some more 2P units, still inside of the network, before confronting the only boss in this raid originating from Automata, the Red Girl. The Red Girl is a creepy-looking girl wearing all red in Automata, who you can first start to notice spying on 2B and 9S during the B route, when you're replaying the first half of the game as 9S. In the C route, it's revealed that the Red Girl is a representation of the machine lifeform's hive mind consciousness. It is the machine lifeforms, and everything that's happened over the course of the game, including the endless war the machine lifeforms and the androids find themselves entangled in for millennia, has been a part of the Red Girl's design, so that it can learn and evolve. The Red Girls are the actual main antagonists of Automata, and they don't reveal themselves until nearly the end of the game. Here, the Red Girls have been seduced by the Seed of Destruction, and are the true antagonists of this raid series, seeking to destroy the first. After you fight the Red Girl, you emerge from the network, and are actually scaling the tower itself. Like NieR Automata, your final ascent of the tower has you fighting 2 mini-bosses, Zunzi and Mengzi. These 2 robots are identical to the robots you fight in the Tower of Automata, Koshi and Roshi. I don't know why they changed the names of these ones, but not of, say, Angles. Finally, you reach the very top of the tower and see another Red Girl there channeling some sort of portal, which a gigantic Seed of Destruction is emerging from. This portal looks very much like the portal the Watchers emerged from in Drakengard, so this is presumably the final stages of the apocalypse beginning. Many more red girls appear, and NieR tries to destroy them, but they fly up into the seed, and like an event that happens back in Drakengard 1, they are transformed into a monstrous creature, the False Idol. The False Idol is only the first phase of this fight, really serving as another mini-boss before you fight the true final boss. It throws tons of spells at you, identified with angelic text. Once you've dealt enough damage to the idol, it flies up into the portal, the blocky structures surrounding the fight transform into replicas of a modern city, probably meant to be Tokyo, and out of the portal emerges the true final boss, her inflorescence. And it's here where the lore goes absolutely buck wild. On the surface, this boss looks like a gigantic hybrid of 2P and the Red Girl, with 4 arms and long flowing hair. More on who and what this boss actually is in the analysis section. The fight itself is a lot of fun. She throws orbs at you, she summons trains that you have to avoid, and at one point she throws a building at you from beneath the ground, so you need to angle your camera down to know how to avoid it. I've also heard some people say that the building she throws is the Square Enix headquarters, but I can't confirm that. Once you kill her inflorescence, she fades out of existence, and 2B and NieR rush to try to close the portal before any evil giant babies can emerge from it. Anog steps forward and says she'll help too by going through the portal and helping close it from the other side. Anog gives you a letter to deliver to her brother and goes through the portal. It works, and the portal closes, the day is saved. As soon as the portal is closed, 2B and NieR drop to the ground lifelessly. The pod you repaired much earlier tells you that it has a final message from 2B recorded for you. 2B relates that she discovered that everything, the white androids, the tower, the machines, all of it came from the orb, so too did she and NieR, though. As long as they're there, the gate can never be closed, and so they must disappear from this reality if it's going to be saved. As this part of the message plays, the bodies of 2B and NieR vanish, blinking out of reality, as does the pod. Everything the sphere created will now disappear. Or at least that's what should happen, as the tower starts to collapse and the player runs to safety. With 2B and NieR gone, that just leaves you to deliver the bad news to Konog. His sister is gone, sealed away on the other side of the portal. Konog decides to leave the village and travel since the whole town seems to hate him, save for the dig site chief. The dig site chief is distraught when you tell him, but there's nothing he can do. Now that the crisis is averted, the dwarves of Camra are back to being out for blood. Glog, the village elder, suggests that they need to find someone to blame for all of this so the bloodthirsty crowd can move on, perhaps tracking down Konog and executing him for his crimes. Instead, the entire crowd turns on Glog, their leader, saying he should have seen all of this coming. The dig site chief, who again they really should have given a name to since he's our main character for the next few quests, says everyone needs to stop casting blame on others and runs off. One of the dwarves does follow him though, doomsaying dwarf, and apologizes for how he's acted, saying he wants to try to do right by others and help the town get back on its feet. For some reason I'll never quite understand, to actually get the ending of this entire storyline, you have to keep coming back to Camra for 6 real-life weeks in order to complete unlocking weekly quests that have you dive into the copied factory and the puppet's bunker exploration zones again to pick up parts and to help Camra rebuild. Thankfully, it doesn't actually make you wait several weeks to get the rest of the story on replays, but it also doesn't actually make you do the weekly quests. It basically just shows you the cutscenes from them. I'll be honest, I had completely forgotten these weekly quests even existed until playing this again for the video. I know I must have done them at some point because I have New Game Plus unlocked for this storyline, but I literally have no memory of them whatsoever. Which I'm going to assume means they're pretty unremarkable. Basically, over the course of this series of weekly quests, you and the chief begin rebuilding Camra yourselves, and eventually, seeing your efforts, more and more of the dwarves join in. It also becomes apparent that Glog, the village elder, is acting very strangely out of character, implying that he has somehow been corrupted by the Seed of Destruction. If they ever wanted to do a follow-up to this raid series, this is probably how they'd do it, but to be honest, I don't think they're ever going to do a follow-up to it. Each time you finish one of these weekly quests, you receive a letter from Konog, which gets added to the portable archive. For convenience's sake, here are all 6 of the letters at once.
Dear player, I hope this message finds you. I'm going on a journey to learn the secrets of the white spheres for myself. Maybe some of them will be of use to you. I'll keep a record, just in case. I forgot to mention, I brought a pod with me. It assures me that the spheres came from a different world, and their purpose is to invade others by duplicating the machine lifeforms. It's weird to think that to someone, ours is the other world. I found out that 2B and 9S accessed the spheres before this all started, which is why they knew about the machine lifeforms' plans to take over our world. They added their own data to that of the machine lifeforms when copies were being made, like some sort of technological virus. Apparently, so they could come here and stop the machines. They were our allies, from beginning to end. The white spheres have ties to 2B and 9S's world, which is almost inconceivably advanced. I found that data there is stored by machines bearing the names of gods, and even the tiniest glimpse of the smallest portion of it reveals memories by the hundreds. People's memories. What does it mean? I need to know. I knew all along, really. I knew that Anog was dead, and that thing with me only looked like her. But being with her, whatever she was, it kept me alive. It made me want to go on living. If the spheres can create anything, rebuild it in our world, then surely they can grant me this. For as long as I can remember, it's been just the two of us. Hardly anyone ever bothered to be kind to us. But we always had each other. When I was with Anog, there was nothing to fear. What my sister wanted most was to get revenge on the world that had done this to us. I can't accept that the world got her first. I won't.
These messages do work for me. This is, I think, the best writing Konog gets. You do get a vibe of his desperation, loneliness, and despair. I wish the writing on this character had set this up earlier. I wish we'd gotten some hint that he knew Anog wasn't his real sister and was ignoring that fact to cope, because there is some pathos here, but it just comes way too late in the story. This all culminates with one final quest that was added in patch 5.55 as an epilogue to the story. The quest, Where the Heart Leads. You learn that Konog has been spotted in the nearby city of YoRHa and travel to go see him. He's been living in the shantytown surrounding the city proper, and when you reach his home, the player is treated to a cutscene of him. He's been obsessively studying the machine lifeform's technology, trying to find a way to bring his sister back, but having no luck. As the weeks pass by, he falls deeper and deeper into despair. Finally, as he says he can't live without her any longer, collapsed on the floor, he hears footsteps coming to his door. Anog appears, calling him a crybaby and telling him she's returned in order to bring him with her to come explore a whole new world. The two depart hand in hand, and we fade to white. When you reach Konog's home, there's nothing there but his hat and his books. This ending is deliberately left open to interpretation. If you want to believe Konog and Anog get a happy ending, then somehow Anog found a way to do what no one else, including the Watchers, have been able to and escaped the pocket dimension where she was being held. Now she and her brother get to live out their days traveling the multiverse together. I don't think that's what happened, though. We don't know anything about the realm where the Watchers are sealed, but I can't imagine it's any good. I can't imagine it's hospitable to a dwarf who's stuck there. The Drakengard series doesn't traffic in happy endings. Bittersweet is the best you can hope for, and after everything Konog and Anog went through, I just don't think they get to literally walk off into the sunset at the end. Personally, I think this ending, with Konog lying on the floor as his sister finds him, and the two of them walk off into the light, I think Konog is dead. Maybe this is the facsimile of his sister that's come to spirit him away, or more likely, this is his real sister, here to walk him into the afterlife. I think Konog, in his despair, drank himself to death, or took his own life. It is open to interpretation, though. I don't think my reading on it is the only correct one, and if you want to believe it's a truly happy ending, then I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. And that is the story of YoRHa Dark Apocalypse. What'd you think? Well, I have some thoughts. Let's start here. Is it a good raid series purely from a mechanical perspective? Well, this is probably going to be the most controversial thing I say in this video, but I think that if we're just talking about these as pieces of playable content, these raids are brilliant. I think the mechanics are super unique and interesting, and I think they're fun to execute. I think the environments are super distinct and cool to look at. I think the music is incredible. Yes, it's largely just NieR music, but I like listening to NieR music. I like all of the rewards you get from this, the minions, the gear sets, the 2B outfit, the pod mount that doesn't actually come from the raid for some reason, and the hairstyles. I'm really impressed with how well they managed to transfer the mechanics of the NieR games into FF14 in a coherent way. NieR is pretty unique mechanically, not just playing as a sort of character action RPG hybrid, but also as a bullet hell game. In both NieR games, you have to deal with enemies throwing glowing red orbs towards you that you either have to attack to destroy or dodge. The only other 3D third-person action-styled game that adapts bullet hell mechanics like this, which I can think of, is Returnal, which of course came out years later. So it's really the thing that makes the combat of NieR stand out. This mechanic translates surprisingly well to an MMO. While the orbs travel much more slowly than they do in either NieR game, because FF14 is inherently a slower-paced game than NieR is, the entire raid series uses this bullet hell orb mechanic in a way I personally think is pretty cool. Several of the fights in this raid series are lifted directly from the NieR games, and I think it does a good job of translating all of them. The Engels fight, for example, is still about reading his movements to tell which side of the platform Engels' massive arms are going to hit. He also summons a barrage of missiles partway through the fight, just like the fight in Automata, which here serves as the adds phase of the fight, where you need to destroy several machine life forms before he can fully charge his attack. He also summons 2 Marks units, the names for the giant buzzsaw crane arms, which need to be destroyed. Overall, given how completely different the format of this game is, I'm impressed at how well they managed to translate this fight over. The fight against her inflorescence has you block rings that are descending from the sky by rotating your own ring to match the color, which directly invokes the rhythm minigames at the end of Drakengard 1 and Drakengard 3, where you fight the Queen Beast and Zero's final form, respectively. And, I mean, if the part in the Red Girl fight where you're suddenly teleported into one of the hacking minigames from Automata doesn't put a big grin on your face, I don't know what to tell you. This is just so much fun. This is just such a fun way of translating this mechanic. It made me laugh out loud the first time I saw it. It sparks joy in my cold little dead heart. If you're a fan of the NieR games, it's neat to see their unique style of combat translated this way. And if you are just a Final Fantasy XIV player who doesn't care about NieR at all, I still think it works really well because it gives this raid a distinct mechanical personality. They're fun, they're complicated, but once you learn them, I find them extremely fun to run. Yes, these raids are difficult, they are easily the hardest and longest Alliance raids in the game, but personally, I mean, these are endgame pieces of content. That difficulty isn't a negative to me. I do think that the bosses in this raid series generally have too much health. It takes too long to kill them. Engels, in particular, is an egregiously long fight, but I don't think that's a problem isolated to the NieR raids as far as endgame Final Fantasy XIV content goes. It does suck when you're trying to get a really quick Alliance raid roulette out of the way, and you pop Paradigm's Breach occasionally, so your 10-minute Circus Tower run turns into around an hour, but Honestly, I'd rather run Paradigm's Breach over Circus Tower for the 8 millionth time any day of the week. And they're not mythic raids from WoW or something. You can still easily complete them with a pug just by throwing numbers at them, even if you do wipe once or twice. This is subjective. I mean, everything in this video is. This is all my opinion. But personally, I would not trade the NieR raids for anything. Probably the number one piece of criticism I see about these raids is that they're a waste of a slot. We only get 2 raids per expansion, 1 Alliance raid series, and 1 normal raid series, so by using an entire Alliance raid for a crossover, there's an opportunity cost. That could have been something else, something more uniquely Final Fantasy XIV, and instead we got a bunch of fan service for a completely different game. I am sympathetic to this piece of criticism. Yes, as someone who thinks Shadowbringers is specifically one of the best games ever made, there are so many plot threads and ideas that we could have used the Alliance raid to explore instead. We could have had a Ronka raid, we could have had an Amarat raid, we could have had an Ilmeg raid. They could have done anything, and instead they did a crossover. I still don't think there's necessarily anything stopping them from coming back to the first and doing a Ronka raid someday if they want to, but if you're someone who doesn't care about NieR at all, yeah, that's pretty frustrating. The other part of the waste of a slot criticism I'm less sympathetic with, though, is that the raid doesn't progress the story of Final Fantasy XIV and of the first specifically. That it's a filler arc, and that everything that happens doesn't matter because the whole raid deletes itself from existence at the very end. Is that actually the problem here? Is it a problem that this is an episodic, self-contained story? I don't think so. Final Fantasy XIV is structured as a collection of a ton of stories. If some of those stories are more self-contained than others, as long as that particular story is good, I don't have an issue with that. That story being good, though, is where the problem really starts. The first question pretty much everyone asks when they hear about this raid series is it canon? It's very well known among the FF14 community that Yoko Taro says the NieR raid is canon. So when you ask this, people usually say that it is, but I can't actually find where he supposedly said this. I'm willing to be corrected on this. If you have a source, please link it in the comments below, but I've spent a significant amount of time looking, and think this might just be an example of players repeating misinformation as common knowledge. Regardless of whether Yoko Taro said so or not, in my opinion, this question is pretty misguided, given the way the Drakengard series functions. The entire point of the franchise at this point is that everything is canon. The books, the manga, each ending to each game, the gacha game, the crossovers, everything. So yes, YoRHa Dark Apocalypse is a canon spin-off of NieR Automata. So is NieR Reincarnation, and so is the recent orchestral concert, apparently. I'm not sure how that works, but people insist that it's true. That doesn't necessarily mean that when the time comes for a proper mainline NieR 3, it'll require you to know what happened in the raid series, though, because for all intents and purposes, I just think of this as another branch, another possible timeline in the Draken NieR franchise. There's a lot of Drakengard fan service in this raid series. Obviously, some of these references are easy to pick up on, like fighting Engels or the Red Girls, but there are some deeper cuts here too, including ones which are essential to understanding what's actually going on in this raid. Most of all, the orb, the seed of destruction. So, you might have some questions. If you've only played NieR Automata, this orb comes out of nowhere and turns into the most load-bearing plot element in the whole storyline. What the heck is this, and how was it able to bring Annog back from the dead? This orb is called a Seed of Resurrection, or a Seed of Destruction, and it is an extremely important part of the plot, all the way back in Drakengard 1. What is it? Well, To quote the Drakengard fandom wiki's description, what exactly are the Seeds of Resurrection? There is nothing in existence which can answer this question. I'm going to try anyway, though. The plot of the first Drakengard involves various seals being broken by an evil empire in order to usher in the apocalypse, and when those seals are broken, the seeds appear. There's a lot of mystery surrounding the seeds, and a lot of the plot surrounding them is open to interpretation. But in a nutshell, it is believed that they are a sort of powerful artifact left behind on Earth by the gods, and it is said that they are able to bring the dead back to life. The gods of the Drakengard world are not benevolent, however. They are actively hostile towards humanity, and have left the seeds behind in order to destroy mankind. In one of the endings of Drakengard 1, the character of Inuart, who starts off as an ally but ends up turning on you, uses one of the seeds in order to bring his beloved ex-fiancée, Furiae, back to life. It does work. Furiae is brought back to life, but she comes back wrong.
Furiae, you have returned to me.
These seeds of destruction were sown by the gods to destroy entire worlds, to usher in the apocalypse. The monster version of Furiae serves as the final boss for one of Drakengard 1's endings, probably the most dire ending out of all of them. You are just barely able to defeat Furiae, but once you do, you see that all of the seeds, of which there are hundreds, have started spitting out clones of this Furiae monster as well. An endless army of these creatures is emerging from the seeds, and the world is well and truly doomed. Inuart's inability to let go of Furiae after she breaks off their engagement gets her killed, and his inability to let go of her death destroys the entire world. So, the Seeds of Destruction were placed on Earth by the gods to usher in the apocalypse, and we learn over the course of the series that Drakengard is very much set within a multiverse. The gods are aware of the multiversal nature of this world, and so what the appearance of this orb seems to be implying is that the gods of Drakengard sent these seeds to other realities up to and including the reality of Final Fantasy XIV's multiverse, in this case, the first. The seeds have probably been underground for hundreds or thousands of years, but during that cave-in, one was unearthed, and Anog's body fell into it. Just like it resurrected Furiae, it resurrected Anog as a tool to be used to usher in the apocalypse. The YoRHa Dark Apocalypse, if you will. Unlike Furiae, it didn't resurrect Anog as an evil harpy monster, but as a seemingly normal dwarf, and then used her indirectly and without her knowledge to further its own plans. It's worth mentioning that the color white is used within the Drakengard series to symbolize corruption, a bleaching of reality. Stark white things in this series are usually very bad news, whether it's the Seeds of Destruction, White Chlorination Syndrome, the Watchers, the Queen Beast, the evil monster that Furiae turned into, the ash that destroys the world in the first NieR, the tower at the end of NieR Automata, which is likely being influenced by the same corruption that's existed for thousands of years at that point, and so on. Anog's outfit being sheer white is also consistent in the flashback before she's killed, but narratively, symbolically, her outfit and 2P's outfit being stark white are meant to be hints to players familiar with the Drakengard games of what's to come, and anything else that is colored stark white is bad news. This is the real origin of the P-model YoRHa androids. The Seed is spitting out replicas of 2B and other YoRHa model units in the same way that it cloned countless Furiais in Drakengard 1. It's also, I think, why elements from the NieR universe, like the factory or the bunker, are being copied here in the first. Repurposing familiar things as a part of its grand design is its modus operandi. Anog's story towards the end is where this raid series gets the closest to working for me narratively. The idea that the reason Anog was acting so recklessly in giving 2P the key and helping her in general was not just stupidity, but because she is a part of the same plot to usher in the destruction of the world that 2P is, that's pretty good. It fixes some of the problems I've had with this character up to this point, adding a sort of sad irony to her situation. It paints her in a light similar to, like, the family in Hereditary. Anog never had any control over her own actions, even if she thinks she did. The game was rigged from the start. Konog being in such denial of his sister's death that he just ignored what he saw and has been treating this facsimile like his sister for years and years is also pretty interesting. I just wish it hadn't taken 2/3 of this storyline and over a year of real time to start getting to the parts of this story where it gets interesting. There is the skeleton of an interesting story with Konog and Anog towards the end, but the pacing of the story is so abysmal that it doesn't get interesting at all until most people have already stopped paying attention. Because of how FF14's raid series are released, each part of YoRHa Dark Apocalypse was released months and months apart. The first raid, the copied factory, and the first set of quests associated with it, other than that introduction quest where you meet Konog and Anog, were released with patch 5.1 on October 28, 2019. The second raid, The Puppet's Bunker, which continued the story, was released nearly a year later with patch 5.3 on August 10, 2020. The third and final installment was released another 8 months later with patch 5.5 on April 12, 2021. The quest that starts to make Konog and Anog's story interesting with this reveal of Anog's nature hit in 5.4, which was released on the 8th of December 2020, so at that point, this storyline had been going on for well over a year. And it's here where we start to see the problems of taking the narrative design that the Drakengard games are known for and trying to apply them to an ongoing game. Ongoing narratives are very different from narratives released all at once. It requires a completely different approach to make them work. The Drakengard and NieR games all start relatively basic for roughly their first half, and then really go off the rails towards their finales. It's those finales that the games are typically remembered for, but that relatively basic first half is important because it sets up what expectations are going to be broken later on. If, however, NieR had launched and released episodically and only included the first half up to the time skip, and then waited 10 months and released the rest of Route A, and then waited another 8 months and released the rest of the game, I don't think people would have liked it. Even if the content were exactly the same, people would already have gotten their first impression and moved on. YoRHa Dark Apocalypse feels like it's just spinning its wheels until the third act begins. If you were playing this in real time, like I was, then you had no context for why these characters are here or what's going on at all for over a year, even if you were completely up on your Drakengard lore. It led to people being extremely confused, even about things that do have clear answers within the raid storyline itself. Like, I see a ton of people confused about if the seed that 2B hitched a ride on came from another planet, why did it end up on the first instead of the source? That is explained. it didn't come from another planet exactly. It's an interdimensional entity. It literally came from the NieR universe. It was just as likely to show up in the dimension of the first as it was in the source, because it's specifically dimension hopping. I'm not blaming anyone for not getting that. It's hidden in a lore diary in the epilogue, at which point most people had stopped caring, and it's unclear what coming from another world means if you aren't familiar with the Drakengard games. What I'm saying is that this story needed to be more clearly told, especially since there are things about this storyline which seem deliberately open to interpretation. Final Fantasy XIV's storytelling style is very different from Drakengard's. It's got a great story, but it is usually very explicit with presenting information to the player. The story is very clearly communicated unless something is specifically meant to be vague. The Drakengard and NieR games always feel like you're only seeing one character's perspective in much larger stories, much larger conflicts that you'll never get to understand the full picture of. Just like real life. Compare this issue with pacing and clarity to the other raid, the 8-man raid, releasing at the same time. I don't know how people feel about Eden's story, but personally I love it. I think it's an incredible storyline that not only feels relevant in the context of Final Fantasy XIV, but which has those hooks. Eden is going to be its own video at some point, but without getting too into the details, I think Eden not only starts with an incredibly strong hook for its first content drop, but I think it does a phenomenal job of keeping the player interested in coming back with each update. The end of the first raid had me itching to see what was going to happen next in the story, and the end of the second raid had me so excited to see how this story was going to conclude. For Dark Apocalypse, I can't really say the same thing. I was always excited to see the next NieR raid because I wanted to see NieR things in this game I love, and because I think this raid is very strong mechanically and very fun to play, but I was always fuzzy on what was even happening in the story, how these characters were here at all, and why any of what we were doing mattered. Not mattered to the game at large. I honestly don't care about that, but why it mattered even within the context of the self-contained story it is telling. It's not until that third and final raid near the very end of the story that we finally learn what the hook for this story as a NieR Automata story has been. And if you're a fan of this series overall, it's a damned good one. This is a what-if story for hardcore Drakengard fans. What if the Red Girls, the machine lifeform consciousness, had stumbled upon the seeds of destruction? How would the seeds interact with the machine lifeforms, and with a being of pure consciousness? How would it use them directly? Visually, the Red Girls have always evoked Mana, the leader of the Cult of the Watchers trying to destroy the world in Drakengard 1. The Red Girls also explore a theme that echoes Inuart's and Mana's, of what we give up in order to get what we want, since they are perpetuating an eternal war in order to evolve. It makes sense that they would be extremely vulnerable to the allure of the seeds, in the same way Inuart or Mana were. This is a really good idea, a genuinely good piece of fan service. The good kind of fan service, the kind that actually feels like it makes sense to the narrative and is more than just an empty reference. I really wish they had teased this earlier. I really wish this whole story had been more front-loaded with its interesting ideas, because it's basically the climax before you learn what the hook of the story even is, and that's pretty clearly a problem. Yes, the Red Girl is a big reveal at the end of Automata 2, but unlike Dark Apocalypse, the story of Automata doesn't feel like it's just spinning its wheels until that point. Things do happen over the course of that entire game. There are multiple arcs that end up being recontextualized by the Red Girls revealing themselves. There are interesting questions to ask that aren't just, what exactly is going on here? By far, though, the piece of this entire raid series that feels the most important to the larger franchise is her inflorescence, the very final boss of the raid series. If you haven't played Drakengard 3, and You shouldn't, it isn't very good. What you're even fighting at the end of the final raid might be unclear. Even if you have played and beaten Drakengard 3, this isn't as direct as most of the other returning bosses, like the Red Girl or Engels. While her inflorescence looks like an amalgamation of 2P and the Red Girl, its design is also very clearly evocative of the main character from Drakengard 3, who we haven't really mentioned yet. Zero. Drakengard 3 is the earliest game on the Drakengard timeline. Before the events of the game, Zero is infected by a sort of cosmic entity called the Flower. A lot of Drakengard 3's plot is confusing and left deliberately open to interpretation, but the Flower is likely another tool used by the gods of the Drakengard universe to destroy mankind. It is essentially the original source of all of the evil corruption in the Drakengard series. The Watchers, those come from the Flower. White chlorination syndrome, that's from the Flower. Eve's weird tattoos that spread across his body the more violent and angry he gets, that's probably somehow connected to the Flower too. The Flower gives Zero incredible godlike power and makes her borderline immortal, but she also knows it's eventually going to corrupt her and lead her to destroying the world. Before the events of the game, she tries to take her own life to avoid this, but the Flower realizes what she's doing and grows 5 imperfect clones from her. Her sisters, named 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, collectively referred to as intoners. The plot of Drakengard 3 is that Zero is hunting down and killing all of her Flower-corrupted sisters before it's too late. In the final, true ending of Drakengard 3, Zero is successful, and once she's reabsorbed all of her sisters, she has her dragon partner Mikhail seal her and her sisters away in some sort of pocket dimension. As you do this, she transforms, and her sisters return as giant white creatures, very clearly evocative of the Queen Beast from the end of Drakengard 1, and the final boss fight to seal her away once again switches into a difficult rhythm minigame, like the boss fight against the Queen Beast was. The implication here is that in Drakengard 1, when the Cult of the Watchers destroyed the seals and unleashed the apocalypse, the seals they were destroying were the seals to Zero's pocket dimension. The Queen Beast is either part of Zero, or it's one of her sisters, like we see in the final battle of Drakengard 3, or some people seem to think it's a character from the mobile game I haven't played, F66X, and all of the weird flying monster babies are children Zero and her sisters have had, or artificial creations like the ones 3 creates, or the creatures summoned in their boss fights. The Drakengard wiki tells me that ending D, the one where Zero is sealed away, isn't even the ending considered to lead to the events of Drakengard 1, which again would imply that the Queen Beast isn't actually Zero, just one of many beings like her. Her inflorescence, then, which prominently features the flower which Zero had growing out of her, is Zero. What remains of her after over 10,000 years sealed away in another dimension, merged with the machine consciousness. Its outfit is a closer match to Zero's outfit in Drakengard 3 than it is to 2B's or the Red Girl's, and the name Her Inflorescence refers to the head of a flower. There's also, of course, the fact that the orbs behind so much of this plot are called the Seeds of Destruction, with the central entity responsible for most of the bad things that happen in the Drakengard universe being the flower. Are these literally or symbolically the seeds of the flower? Arguably, this isn't the only reference to the flower in the raid so far, either. The first boss of the Puppets Bunker, the Aegis unit, is sort of shaped like an upside-down black flower. And interestingly, it's the first boss we see using magic attacks from the Drakengard universe, as rings inscribed with angelic text emerge from the Aegis during one of its attacks. In the world of Drakengard, the angelic script, based off of the real-world celestial alphabet, is used to represent magic. I don't believe we ever see YoRHa units using magic like this in Automata, so it's another piece of foreshadowing for Drakengard fans, tipping them off to what's going on before the reveal. At the end of the puppet's bunker, when countless bodies spawn out of 2P's corpse, the way they crawl out of 2P's body looks identical to the scene where Eve is born from a large wound 2B landed on Adam early on in Automata, but it's also very similar to the way Zero regenerates whenever she's mortally wounded in Drakengard 3 by emerging naked and covered in blood from the flower embedded in her eye. The final fight against her inflorescence is the first part of this entire raid series where it's actually a sequel to the NieR franchise in any sort of traditional way. Honestly, this is the only part of the entire raid series where the question of, is this canon, would even matter at all, because it's the only part of the storyline where the events are important or interesting enough to matter outside of this self-contained story. The part that does matter to the larger Drakengard franchise is that this ending features players finally putting to rest the protagonist of Drakengard 3, who has been trapped for millennia at this point. You are fighting the original corruptive force in this franchise, and the protagonist who it corrupted. If you are a Drakengard fan, this is an extremely cool reveal, and if it is considered canon, then it's one of the most important moments in the entire franchise. How much of this is explained in the actual YoRHa Dark Apocalypse raid series? Almost none of it. I think this is why the raid's story has a reputation among a lot of players as being complete nonsense. It's not. What's happening here is actually pretty interesting in the context of the Drakengard series, since we haven't seen the seeds show up again since Drakengard 2, but it's assuming you've played a nearly 20-year-old at the time game in order to be really able to follow what's going on. That's not a good bet, especially when most of your players might not even be familiar with NieR Automata itself. Even if you have played all of the Drakengard and NieR games, some of the things that happen in this still make no sense, and not small nitpicks, major, load-bearing parts of the plot. Take, for example, the game's explanation of where the copied factory and the puppet's bunker themselves came from. The game says that everything NieR related came from the seed, which raises a few confusing questions. Even if we ignore that in those notes from the epilogue, Connaught is traveling with a pod that was presumably made by the seed, and was therefore supposed to have vanished when the portal was sealed, the copied factory and the puppet's bunker are also still around, since you have to revisit them for the post-raid weekly quests. Why did they not disappear when the tower did? Okay, maybe the machine lifeforms and the P-units actually built those two locations out of mundane materials they found in Calusia, except no, because that's contradicted by another lore entry in the Portable Archive, explaining why 210 is initiating attacks against us in the third fight of Puppet's Bunker, saying that the P-units found a backup of 210's consciousness on the bunker's server and reprogrammed it to take control, which does imply this is not just a rebuilt replica of the bunker, but an exact copy of it created by the seeds. But then why doesn't it disappear like everything else does, and now I've gone cross-eyed. I worry that this sounds like I'm just picking random nits with the story, or pointing to things and going, ooh, it's a plot hole. But this is the core explanation for why the raids are here in the first place. That's not a plot hole, that's a gaping plot abyss from which nothing can escape. Another problem is this. I don't feel like there's much to this raid series aside from the fan service. The YoRHa raids just feel meandering narratively. There are themes, but the story gets so bogged down by fan service, by big, cool lore deep cuts, that it forgets to be about anything. To be saying anything. NieR and NieR Automata especially are games that are about something. NieR Automata is interested in reflecting on themes of war, on themes of sexuality, and on themes of existentialism. Even if you don't like NieR Automata, and don't think it does justice to its subject matter, or think it's just pretentious garbage, at the very least you have to admit that those themes are there. YoRHa Dark Apocalypse isn't really about anything, and that makes it disappointing as a NieR product. If you ask me, this entire storyline reeks of rewrites and cut content, which is why it's so muddy. Take, for example, Anog's resurrection. It feels to me like this entire story would make much more sense if Kannog were directly responsible for resurrecting Anog, and therefore responsible for everything else that happens in this raid series. It would make it a story of someone losing themselves in their grief, doing something desperate to bring back their loved one, and causing a lot of pain and suffering in the process. The way grief can turn us into monsters if we aren't careful, and if we don't process it and move on, which, by the way, is one of the primary themes of Shadowbringers, the expansion this was released as a part of. Make Kannog an Emmett Selk parallel. But he isn't. He didn't choose to resurrect Anog. She was killed by a cave-in, and just so happened to fall directly into a seed of resurrection. Which, I mean, come on. Just saying that out loud, isn't that kind of lame? Also, making Anog actually sane and good and under her own control at the end of the story, as well as the copies of 2B and 9S that hitched a ride with the seed and were then created by it, really conflicts with how we understand the Seeds of Destruction to work based on previous games. I mean, we've never seen anyone else produced by the Seeds that just seems like a normal person, right? Why would Anog be any different? What's this? This is just crossing my desk. Who the hell is NieR? Okay, so yeah, remember when I said that I didn't play Drakengard 2 because I've heard repeatedly that nothing that happens in it is canon or matters at all to any other story in the franchise? Well, I should have followed my own advice. This is what I get for listening to Reddit threads, because apparently that's not actually true. The main character of Drakengard 2, who seems to be the most pure-hearted protagonist in the entire franchise, is a young man named NieR, who, it turns out, late in that game, is a production of one of the Seeds of Resurrection. Now, I still haven't played Drakengard 2, because every time I try to emulate it, it does this. So all of this is actually based on research and watching other people's lore videos about Drakengard 2 instead of my own first-hand experience. In a nutshell, NieR was created when, in a parallel version of Drakengard 1's timeline, Inuart not only placed Furiae in the seed, but crawled into it himself with her. Inuart's pact partner, the Black Dragon, now named Legna in Drakengard 2, then put some of his own blood into the seed, and all of this human and dragon DNA mixed up inside of the seed and produced a baby. This baby looked human, but it was actually an entirely new creature, the first and only one of its kind, the new breed, NieR. In the world of Drakengard, the dragons are another creation of the gods, the same ones who created the flower and the watchers, and all that other nastiness that causes the entire Drakengard timeline to happen. Unlike the watchers, they ended up breaking free of the influence of the gods, wanting to claim the world for their own. Because of this origin, they have a rivalry with the flower and the watchers and everything that descended from that branch of the gods' creations. In Drakengard 3, it is established that the only thing that can truly kill things under the power of the flower is the fang of a dragon, either a blade fashioned from it or one of the sisters getting eaten by one of them. NieR was created by Legna in this way in order to use the power of humans, the dragons, and the seed in order to create an all-powerful creature that the dragons could use to take over the world. Legna's blood seems to purify NieR of the influence of the seed and gives him his own free will. So is this new breed, this being created by the seeds but free of their influence, related to Anog? I mean, I don't think so. There's no reason to believe that it is, but it's the only time we've seen anything like this happen in the series, so, you know, I had to mention it. Connaught resurrecting his sister and setting in motion the events of the raid would have just been a retread of the story of Inuart placing Furiae into the seed in the original Drakengard, but at least it would have given us something to work with, and it had been nearly 20 years since the original Drakengard released when this raid was being made. I think it would have been fine to allude to the original game's story in that way. As it is, the characters of Connaught and Annog both are just kind of flat. It's also very weird that given how fanservice focused this raid is, 2B and 9S barely get any screen time through the entire thing. When they do show up, it feels like it's out of obligation, but that the writers didn't actually have any idea what they wanted to do with them here, and so they keep finding reasons to write them out of the plot unless you're actively in one of the raids. If you'll step into my tinfoil hat corner for a minute. The lack of giving 9S and 2B anything to actually do is another place where it feels to me like this story reeks of rewrites. We've got the Seeds of Resurrection in play, and we've got them spitting out copies of 2B, which we've previously only seen happen if someone places a corpse into one of the seeds. In the first set of quests, and the first raid, 2B is the only android we see clad completely in white, which is deliberately reminiscent of Furiae's boss design at the end of Drakengard's B route, when the seeds started spitting out copies of her. As it is, the copied factory feels very weirdly disconnected from the events of the two raids that follow it. It just feels bad in the copied factory that 9S ends up being the final boss and is fighting on the same side as the machine life forms, given that they are ultimately the villains of the entire storyline. What if this was originally meant to be a more explicit sequel to, let's say, ending D of Automata, where 2B is dead and 9S has become completely unhinged from losing her? What if 9S was originally the one responsible for the events of the raid? Make him put 2B into one of the seeds, trying to bring her back. Again, it's a little bit of a retread of Inuart's story, but I think it would work a lot better than what we've got now, and would actually build on the story and characters of Automata. Maybe the logic virus 9S has towards the end of Automata was responsible for 9S putting 2B in the seed. It's implied to be in some way the same as the red eye disease that hypnotized Inuart in the first game. The problem, of course, is that it would also spoil the story of Automata, which had only been out for 2 years when this raid series began. So I could see there being pushback on a crossover event like this, containing quite such heavy spoilers for a relatively recent game. So maybe, relatively late into the story planning process, things were heavily rewritten to the version we have now. Maybe this is nothing. Maybe this is just my fanfiction. That's fine. I still can't help but think that the elements are all there for a better story, a more coherent story, and one which was about something, about loss and about grief. A more Drakengard story, with more flawed characters. Even if nothing I said was ever planned, I still think this story pulls its punch at the end by not making Annog a truly evil replica, and by not making Connaught truly culpable in what happens. And of course, by making an ending that has a plausible, happy reading where Connaught and Annog are reunited. I think this is the problem with trying to put a Drakengard story into a Final Fantasy game. The Drakengard games never pull their punches like this. The Drakengard franchise is a huge downer. That's the point. It's about taking traditional fantasy heroes and pulling them apart, making them into monsters. You could argue that NieR Automata does this less than the other games in the series, but I think it's still very much a theme there, with the eventual reveal we get of what 2B's true purpose and classification are, and with 9S's entire arc over the course of the C route. The Drakengard franchise is very cynical. The games in this series are bleak, pessimistic, and usually show the worst in their characters. The Final Fantasy franchise, on the other hand, even at its most bleak and even at its most dire, is ultimately very hopeful, and above all else, very earnest. These two franchises are so thematically opposed that there's always going to be friction in a crossover between the two. When a character is flawed in Drakengard, That's their defining characteristic. That's what they are. While when a character is flawed in Final Fantasy, that's something for them to grow to overcome. The result of trying to apply both approaches at once is that neither is actually compelling. In conclusion, it's better than the Yokai Watch crossover. I didn't have to grind out north of 200 fates to get the damn pod mount, I'll tell you that much. There are a couple other small notes I couldn't find a satisfying place for in the video, so here they are at the very end. First, why is a chord nowhere to be found in this raid? They should have put a chord in this raid. You have a character whose entire thing in the Drakengard universe is that she's aware of the multiverse in the series and can travel freely between realities. And yet you didn't put her in the story about 2B and 9S going to another reality? I mean, she's even an android. This is like the easiest slam dunk piece of fan service I can imagine, and she's just not there. Second, did you know there was also Final Fantasy XIV crossover content in a NieR game as a part of this promotion? This is certainly much more obscure, but the mobile game NieR Reincarnation contained a retelling of Emmett Selk's story and the fall of Emirat called Vestiges of Paradise. I'm not an expert on NieR Reincarnation or how it works, and the game was recently brought down, so I'll never have a chance to play it now, but people have archived the cutscenes from this event, and it can be watched through on YouTube. The whole thing is around 10 minutes long, and retells the story of Emmett Selk in a storybook style. It's a neat, obscure piece of content I wanted to mention, since I'm not sure I'll ever have a reason to mention it again. Link in the description if you'd like to see it. There's a lot I like about YoRHa Dark Apocalypse. I'm only human, so seeing fan service, seeing something I recognize, does get me excited. I'm not immune to it. The final boss, once you're able to understand it, is very cool, and mechanically, as I've covered, I like this raid a lot. At the same time, I think this raid series is undeniably messy. Because it's referencing so many games in a relatively niche series that many people haven't played, it's easy to assume that this story is better if you're able to follow it, if you're familiar with the games in the Drakengard series. I see people say this all the time. Well, the NieR raids have a bad story, but it's probably better if you've played Drakengard. Well, I've played Drakengard. I've played a lot of Drakengard. Yes, it is better if you understand what's going on. Obviously, but it's still flawed. The core issues with this storyline are not fixed by an understanding of Drakengard lore. There's value in understanding how something is flawed, though. I don't think the takeaway here needs to be that crossovers are inherently a bad idea, and Final Fantasy XIV should avoid them in the future. I think the lesson is that when two pieces of media are crossing over, you need to think about how those pieces of media are thematically consistent with each other, and how they are thematically opposed. While I said that I thought there would be friction here because of how thematically at odds these two series are, notice that I didn't say this crossover was an inherently bad idea. Friction can make for a good story. This story could have been something completely different. It could have leaned into those thematic inconsistencies. How a more bleak and cynical world would interact with a more hopeful one. The world of the first, after all, narrowly avoided a similar fate to the world of NieR. This raid series doesn't do that, and as a result, I think it doesn't really work. The problem, as I see it, is that this isn't really a crossover in the traditional sense. We don't see any of the characters from Final Fantasy XIV's world, aside from some dwarves we've never met before, interact with any of the characters from NieR's world. The raids themselves are hidden off in a secluded mountain region, so no one outside of Comra would even be aware that they existed. This isn't a crossover. Nothing is actually crossing over. It's just a NieR game that you happen to play through using your Final Fantasy XIV character. I'm not sure what good that does anyone. What good does it do to hide what is potentially Zero's true ending behind multiple hundreds of hours of an unrelated MMO? That, in my opinion, is an inherently flawed idea. And unfortunately, it's one that most people either didn't see, didn't understand, or didn't care about. that is YoRHa Dark Apocalypse's legacy. If you're still watching this video, then I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is a little bit different from the format of my other Final Fantasy XIV videos. I'm trying something slightly new, so I hope you've enjoyed it. If you did enjoy the video, please consider doing the YouTube dance. Like, comment, subscribe, you know how this goes. Also, I played a lot of Drakengard and NieR for this video, and I'm considering doing a whole franchise retrospective in the future if that seems like something people would like, so let me know in the comments. I'm getting really close to 20,000 subscribers, and it would be really cool if this video ended up being the one that pushed me over that threshold. If you hated the video and think I'm an idiot, please, by all means, leave a dislike and an angry comment down below. That's equally good for engagement, and will also help me hit that 20,000 subscribers threshold, so I'd appreciate it. Normally, I'd close out this video by plugging some of the other Final Fantasy XIV story videos I've made that are similar in style to this one, but, you know what? I recently put out a new video in my series of in-depth looks at each level of the Hitman series, and you should go check those out. You don't need to have played the games in order to watch them. I put a lot of work into those videos. I think they're pretty good and fun, and not a lot of people watch them. That's okay, because I make them for myself more than anything, and the people who do watch them seem to really love them, but, you know, you might like them, just a thought. There's a supercut of the first 10 episodes, but you can watch them out of order and just jump into the Miami video if you'd like. A special thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube channel members, who have spent $5 or above in order to help me keep making videos. Unhealthy Caillou, Mari SQZ, Sean Kolb, Sir Darkon, Strix 2031, Rachel Aurelia, Michael Beach, Coke Zero, Jade Wang, Dotigor, Dan Luther, Lucky Tiger, Still Just Cow, Jose Armalas, Cabbage, Rekka, Alex Smith, Picayune, Hakan Boyam, Knitend, Shiny Empty Head, That's All, Bell Mage, and Malachi Murphy. If you'd like to get your name read out at the end of future videos, or if you'd like to watch some supporter-exclusive videos, check out patreon.com/Zuldim or click the join button down below. Until next time, thank you for watching, and take care.